just know that whenever we're separating things off like that, that's where your eye line is and that's where your horizon line ought to be. I actually want you to put your vanishing point right in the center, okay? Or really close to the center. So we're doing 1 point perspective first, right? What you're gonna do next is you're gonna draw 9, and I know that I said boxes up in here. They do not have to be squares. In fact, it's often more interesting not to include squares. But what I want you to do, and I'll draw some squares to start, is I want you to go with one above the horizon line, the eye line, one below, one on the left-hand side. They don't have to be squares or whatever, but you're welcome to make some geometric shapes with that. Or you can keep it simple, like if you want to make a vanilla milkshake out of this thing and just keep them square, that's cool, whatever, okay? So go ahead and give those to me, yes. Good determinate lines when you're doing that. We're gonna do the same thing on the right-hand side, okay? So geometric shapes of some kind. I want one above the horizon line, eye line, one on the horizon line, eye line, and one below. Can everybody see this like marking okay? Sometimes the blue is not super bright against the black. And again, they don't have to be shapes like mine at all, right? I just want you to give yourself a visual problem to solve today and be really clean with your marking. If it's not clean, clean it up. You got an eraser, right? Now we got to put one right below the vanishing point, but I don't want you to extend on either side of it. It should be right beneath it in some way, shape, or form, right? So what I'm going to do is kind of like a long thing, and I'm going to make kind of an interesting shape. Geometric shapes seem to work a little bit better when we do this. Same thing above. Okay. So we should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? Okay. So a lot of you said that you knew about perspective, you've studied it, and that's good, right? What would I do next? I've got my vanishing point, I've got my shapes, right? Got my horizon line. What would I do next to make these look dimensional?
You start drawing lines to the point.
Okay? To the point, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm gonna start with this one, and I'm just gonna use my red to show my receding lines or my converging lines, right? When you do this, there's a really good technique that'll help you with drawing like fairly straight lines. Anthony, help this person out, dude. Like, she needs some assistance. Okay, the way I like to do this is I will create a pathway, and I'll start here, and I'll work back and forth, tracing in space until I feel comfortable with it, and then I'm gonna draw the nicest, cleanest line I can, right? So you're gonna do this by hand. You're gonna move to the next one, right? If we have nothing interfering between the corner and our vanishing point, we can go straight to it, right? So again, to help you draw a straight line, trace over it a few times till you got a good feel for it, and then sometimes I kind of use like a continuous edge thing where I'll start it and I'll kind of look at my trajectory and I'll kind of pay attention, where's it going, and I'll draw it too, okay? We want it to look dimensional, so what would I do next? I know you all have studied this to some degree. Okay, the other corners. So typically, when you're drawing, you're dealing with a couple of different types of perspective. One, we're using linear perspective right now with Filippo Brunelleschi's invention / discovery from the High Renaissance, but one thing that's a problem with that is that we're also dealing with overlapping, right? Remember that this is our eye line, okay? So we're experiencing this thing off to the left, and we're watching it sort of converge into space here. We probably wouldn't see the other side of this, right? Because it's a solid object. So I want you to think of it as a solid object, right? If it were transparent, I would draw it something like this. So I want you to think of it as a solid. If you would have to take from a corner to your vanishing point and it asks or calls for you to cut through the shape, you're not gonna draw it, right? Because it's opaque, it's overlapping. So we actually don't need to do that, right? What I'm gonna do though, is I am going to create a limitation for the other side of this structure, this cube, right? So what I need to do is create a parallel line, okay? So parallel meaning like it's going to go the same direction. What's handy with a ruler here is that we can take a ruler, we can lay it parallel, we can drag it over, and boom, we're good. But I see a lot of people make mistakes with that too because the ruler kind of hides things. So this is where it's nice to try to do this freehand. What I do is I decide about how long or how deep into space I want this to go, and I kind of create a little hash mark in there. Then I trace over this several times to get a good feel for that, and how can I create a parallel to that. So I'm going to come over and do the best parallel line that I can there. So at that point, that side is now overlapping my horizon line, so I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to erase that, right? And because I've defined the absolute edge, an eraser would go better. I've decided where the absolute edge of this is going to be. So I don't need these converging lines to go all the way back, right? So that's really what it should look like. So it looks kind of weird. We can't see the top and we can't see the bottom, right? And that's because it's on our horizon line. So that's an important thing to pay attention to because that's really one of those fundamental things that I want you to get from this. So we're going to go back to this shape here. Same thing, other side, right? So I'm going to go from my leading corners and I'm going to pull them to my vanishing point, okay? So I'm going to like trace in space until I feel like I have a really good gauge for where that's going to go. I'm going to draw the straightest line that I can to my vanishing point, okay? Same thing here. Do you need paper, Sadie? Okay. Okay, so again, because this would call for me to come through the shape, I'm not going to draw through it, right? So I'm just going to decide how far back into space this goes. So this time I'm not going to go as deep into space. I'm going to leave some stuff open in here. So I'm just going to try to create a parallel line to this edge right here. So I'm going to come over just a little bit, not very much. And I'm going to sketch in a line that's going to work for that. And then at that point, I'm going to lose my horizon line, get rid of my converging lines. Boom. So the reason why a lot of times instructors will have you draw boxes is because when we recognize something that's a square and then we recognize something that looks like a three-dimensional box, there's a good connection between those two. But what's more important to me is that you understand your relative perspectival experience to what you're looking at and why we have things like a horizon line and a vanishing point, and how much of any one thing you can see at any one time and how that's dictated by those things. So I'm not that interested in boxes, right? So, okay, so let's go to one of the top or the bottom ones, right? So in this case, it looks like I have that cuts that off there. I have 3 points in here that I can bring to my vanishing point, right? So I'm going to start with like my center one. I'm going to try to get a good bead on that straight line. I'm going to sketch that straight line up in there. I'm going to do the same thing on the right. I'm going to do the same thing on the left. Rulers also tend to really slow people down because you spend too much time going, okay, does it match really well? It also kind of messes up people's concept of making a parallel line. I'm not sure why that is. I think it's because it covers things up. I'm not sure. So now in this case, I'm going to decide how deep into space this is going. And I need a parallel here. I need something that looks parallel to that. And then I need to join at this point here, but make a parallel here. It's kind of curved, so I'm going to try to mimic that curve that I see in there. Okay. So when we're looking at something like this, it's important to note the fact that these shapes, when we look at the front of them, they change as they move back into space, right? That's where that illusion of depth is coming into play. So these shapes are getting smaller as they move away from us. And that's diminutive space, and we'll talk more about that like next week. But it's important to know these lines that we're pulling here from each one of the corners, they're straight lines. If they weren't going to a vanishing point, we were drawing isometrically. Anybody know about isometric perspective? Yes, no? Okay. So it's used for engineering. Everything is at like 60 degrees there, everything. So it kind of flattens stuff out, but it does kind of look dimensional. With that, everything is parallel, right? But these are not parallel. They come together, and we don't want that for this. So think of your receding lines or your converging lines as creating what I call an illusion of parallelism, okay? So like that age-old kind of scenario where you're standing like, I don't know, next to a street, in the street, whatever, and you're seeing it go deeply into space. It appears like it's getting closer and closer together, but we know better, right? Because we know if we drive on that street, it's not gonna get smaller and smaller, and then our car's gonna be too big. Or railroad tracks, right? Which I don't recommend standing in the middle of the street or the railroad tracks. Like, you know, your safety is important to me, right? Tigers, be careful, right? But think about that observation into deep space. Nothing's changing about reality except that our experience on the earth is that it's curved, and eventually those things do disappear. That vanishing point is sort of showing how far away that our limitation is to where we cannot see what's going on. So I'm going to go ahead and do this complex shape now. My hope is that through practicing without an array or without a ruler, you'll become really proficient with drawing straight lines to a vanishing point, and eventually it can become second nature to you. So I feel like I had those pretty good, pretty clean. Now, if I were having you draw like architectural plans up, I'd say, yeah, we better use a ruler, right? But this is about observational drawing. So now I'm going to create a parallel. So everything I do has to be parallel. This one's a little bit weird because it goes in another direction, so I have to measure that one. This one comes down pretty well, and then this one goes up like that. This is not magical, okay? This is like, I always think it's funny when people are like, oh my gosh, look at all the dimensions. It's like totally not magical, it's just rules, right? If we follow the rules, we're good. We can make something look dimensional. Okay, so we've got the 1, 2, 3, 4, they're dimensional, they look good. We gotta make the others in the corner look dimensional now. So in this situation, we're looking at these objects. They're right in front of us. We have some floating above us. We have some right in front of us. We have some below the horizon line or our eye line. So that means we can access more of the sides of these in the corner because they're up and to the right or down and to the left. So what we do, and I'm just going to pick my most accessible one here, is we try to draw a straight line to as many points as we can without drawing through the shape that you've created. So I'm going to start here. And I think the rest of them would probably call for me to draw through the shape, so I'm not going to do that. So now I'm going to create parallels. So this needs to be parallel to this. And then as I'm going to complete the bottom of this form, it's important that I get something parallel here that starts here and ends. It's not quite parallel. I'm going to go ahead and try that again. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll space my fingers out, measure it, come down, same. And then I can kind of connect those a little bit better. Okay. Everybody following along okay? I know I go fast sometimes. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and repeat that same thing up in here. I didn't quite get that one there. There we go. I'm down with that. That looks good. And then I'll create parallels here. For whatever reason, that bottom one always seems to be kind of difficult because it's really oblique. There's a lot of foreshortening on the bottom happening. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and finish this one up. Make that one a lot more deep space. And if something doesn't look right to you, again, trust your artistic instinct. It's probably wrong. Like if something looks like wonky when you try to make it parallel, it's probably off somehow. Okay. Because I made that one pointed, I can't see any of the top of it. That's too bad. Didn't think about that. So if I had made this bottom corner, this bottom right corner one, like a square, I'd be able to see three sides of it. But I made it more of a trapezoid shape that won't allow that because it's got a peak to it. So I'm gonna come take a look and make sure everybody's going well. So I want you to draw a shape right over the vanishing point on the horizon line. So like, I'll do something kind of interesting, I guess, but. We're drawing opaque things, right? You shouldn't be able to see through them. So how can I create dimension on that shape? Like, how would you solve this problem? I saw some of you starting to solve it on your paper. Ideas?
You draw the shape inside itself?
Yeah, I suppose if you had like made a tunnel kind of thing. Okay. So you're kind of thinking like if you had something that was a square, you had a vanishing point back in here and you did this, like that's the end. Then those would go back to our vanishing point. Is that what you're kind of thinking? Okay. We can't see through it though. Those are the rules, man. It's opaque. It's a really simple solution.
No.
Like, don't overthink it. Somebody say nothing? You should do one thing. Yeah, erase the vanishing point. Why? Because we no longer have visual access to it. So the reason I do this exercise, and I ask you like a trick question at the end, is because I want you to understand when something is straight in front of you like that from your perspective, and you can't see anything else about it, you have no ability to use linear perspective to bring that into the third dimension, right? So effectively, if it's right in front of you, you've drawn it the best you can, right? unless you have some shading that you can incorporate in that. Now, when you're choosing your reference, your frame of reference, like we talk about the viewfinder kind of thing, this is when it's important to find, like if you're going to use linear perspective, to find a perspective on things that allows you to see more angles and objects in space. Like I'm looking at those really awesome university apartments over there. What I probably wouldn't do to try to draw any of those kind of things in perspective is put myself straight in front of the front of it, right, to where I can't see anything going back into space. So it's important to think about your relative positioning, right? Okay, moving on into 2-point here. So we are actually gonna do some box work on this.